and I have to say, now you hear me hopefully better. It's here a beautiful city, beautiful country, and I'm happy to be here. I also, some of you might know, I replace a colleague of mine, Blaž Vishna, who asked me last week to replace him. He sends also his warmest regards. He had an operation on the shoulder, so this is why he couldn't come. So I have the honor to speak a little bit about the EU antitrust enforcement and focus there on our procedures. So one thing I think we from the Commission always are suggested to say, of course everything I say in my personal capacity. You see there, it's not necessarily identical with the view of the Commission or DG Con, but I hope it is. So let's start. What is EU antitrust or cartel enforcement? I will refer now always to antitrust enforcement and include cartel about. You know probably that's the basics. We have the agreements, Article 101, which distort competition, unilateral abuses. A little bit specificities is that we have a specific rule when it goes to distortive state measures. That is really something specific which you will not find on national level, which is Article 106. And if you see the outcome of our procedure, you see that on average we bring to the college, who then adopts the decisions, 10 to 12 cases. And these decisions often impose very high fines. So you see here the number around roughly 9 billion of euros between 2010 and 2014. It's mostly, if you see these cases, it's not against a single company, but it is against multiple addressees and their parent companies. Since 2004, thanks to Regulation 1 from 2003, we have abolished a centralized notification system and switched to the decentralized system, where we can work together with the national competition authorities, with the courts, in enforcing competition law. And I think that, and I will try to show it on some statistics, has made our work a lot more efficient and effective. So we also have, and I will also speak at the end a little bit about it, we have more scope on priority settings through these decentralized systems. We were able to renew and strengthen our enforcement powers. And to facilitate the assessment afterwards, we issued a lot of guidance on procedure and on substance. And we very much appreciate the cooperation we have within the ECN family with our colleagues from the national competition authorities. So this slide is a rather obvious slide. What are the benefits of EU antitrust cartel enforcement? I just want to pick one, which makes also maybe the EU antitrust procedures a little bit more specific. That is this fostering of the internal market, trying to break down not state but private barriers enacted by undertaking which still divide the internal market. And we try always to focus when we set priorities on these cases where we think they have a cross-border dimension, they have a cross-border element, and this can foster also growing together and having an internal market. So I mentioned I have some statistics. I was first afraid when Honorable Judge Peck was having his statistic that, you know, there's some differences, but apparently we had the same sources. So I'm glad about that. You see here a little bit how it evolves. You heard it already before that we have now the Article 9 procedures, and you can see how they here grow. But this statistics also contains the cartel cases. So you see still the normal decisions, let's say with a fine, are in the majority of the cases, and the fines are still very considerable. Then again, you see here on the number of cases, indeed, one of these cartel cases will have, and I will pick one example where we'll try to illustrate a little bit how our procedure works. There were a lot of addressees, which makes the decision taking very, very difficult. There are mostly cases involved where we deal with companies from all over Europe in different languages, with different traditions, which probably explains the number of cases here, although we are very lucky that we are an authority who has a lot of resources at its disposal. So to see a little bit in what industries we are looking in, and later I will compare it a little bit with the NCAs. You see here that the broad majority is basic and manufacturing industry. This is also, most of these cases are cartel cases in this area. The second maybe, which is interesting, is the IT sector. And you see that afterwards it is a little bit dispersed. You probably know that also our antitrust departments are split by sectors. So to specialize a little bit on certain sectors who have certain specificities. All our antitrust units have a certain sector dedicated to it. And you see this is why here is also a widespread around the sector. Let's just compare it a little bit with the NCAs. You see here that compared, the NCAs are extremely productive. And you see the success stories there, 665 cases, and that was at the end of December 2013. Now it's again considerably more. And also here mostly focused on 101, which is cartels. Mostly, also in the commission you can see that probably like 48% of cases are cartel cases. So we have the same priorities, that we fight really the most harmful infringement, which are cartels. But you see also a considerable number of 102 cases. Mostly in these cases it's about exclusionary practices, refusal to deal, tying, bundling, margin squeeze, exclusionary clauses, and less exploitatives. And it's rather similar on the NCA level. If you look by sector, you see also that also the NCAs are active in all different sectors. What might be interesting and probably not surprising is that the NCAs are very much active on more national, local markets. So, for example, in the food and retail sector, it's very big, while the commission is very, very small there. And also on certain services markets, where also the NCA has just more expertise. And I'm very interested in later the discussion on the food sector, because that is really a sector where we can learn a lot from the NCAs. Others you see deregulated sectors, energy, telecoms, there we're both active and work good together within the network. So that was a little bit the background. Let's now talk about procedure. I will try not to replicate too much. Certain procedures we have mentioned, Dr. Tanner mentioned them, but let me point out a little bit more where we work a little bit different. So first, we start, how do we detect a case? There we have a complaint system, meaning you can submit a formal complaint to us. We have to act on it. So we have to look into it. We have then to decide if we open the case or if we reject the case, which we can do first by a simple letter, but then if a complainant is not happy with our reasons, they can ask for a decision, which then can be appealed by the court. Then we have ex officio, sometimes after we do a sector inquiry. You're probably aware we currently do a sector inquiry in e-commerce. I wouldn't be surprised that as a follow-up there will be cases in that area. But also if we get normal market information from participants, meaning even if statistically we have a lot of ex officio cases, in a lot of these cases we call them informal complaints. They don't want to be formal complaints because that also gives them a lot of visibility, which they sometimes don't want. So in a lot of cases they submit the information like a complaint, but they don't want to have the status of a formal complainant. In the cartel area, leniency is extremely important. Probably 75% of all our cartel cases are triggered by leniency, 25% ex officio, or you have kind of these informal complaints. You sometimes have whistleblowers coming. But leniency is an extremely important tool to detect cartels and to keep them unstable. If you look at 101, 102, indeed it's statistically 60% ex officio, but as I mentioned, in most cases there is a formal complaint, a customer complains, a competitor complains, is behind it, but it's not counted as a formal complaint. So this is how it starts. Then what are our fact-finding procedures? What are our tools, our toolbox for dealing with it? First of all, inspections. We have heard it already before. It's an extremely important tool. We know basically two kinds of inspection. We know the traditional, let's say, unannounced inspections. We call them often dawn raids, because they start very early in the morning. And then we have the announced inspections. These are inspections where sometimes you have a leniency applicant or a company comes forward, and then to simplify the procedure, instead of sending them an RFI and they send us something which might be not so useful, we come there with the agreement, we search the place, and that helps us then to assemble the evidence. But coming back to the unannounced inspection, how do we do it? Do we need a court decision? No, but we need a decision. So we adopt a decision which has to be based on reasonable grounds. We cannot do, and that I think we heard also before, we cannot just do a fishing expedition and just say, well, you know, we heard there's something, but we look now for all product groups, and maybe we find something, maybe not, let's just use it. No, of course, there are procedural safeguards, and they're important, and the court reminds us on them. We have to have reasonable grounds. We have to have already something in the file about these companies, about the product groups involved. And if we have another possibility when we can go to the company, to the business premises, but we even have now also the possibility to go to private homes. This can be very effective because nowadays a lot of people work from home. They have their files at home. So it is a very important tool, and we have already used it in the marine horseshoe case, in the shrimp cartel, where we didn't know that the important person, the sales manager, was working from home. He has all his file there. But in these cases, because of course it is a different for us searching a company or searching a natural person, we need a search warrant by a court. And when we do it, we're always accompanied by one member of the respective NCA family, who then, if, for example, they deny us the inspection, can take over the case. So that is also a little bit a specificity, because we, of course, have not the direct powers as a lot of other national competition authorities have, who can go in with police and so on. There we rely on the national competition authorities, and it works very well. On fact-finding, you see then request for information. Also there we have the possibility to send a simple letter. We heard about it, but we also have the possibility to send it by decision. And that makes a big difference, because when we send it by decision, the company has to not only tell the truth, but it also has to respond, which in the letter it doesn't need to. And also there are procedural safeguards. We heard about the cement case, which was an important judgment in this area. And so there are procedural safeguards also, that then these parties, if they get it, they can go to court. And that brings me to the next point: fairness and right of defense. So you see on the first bullet, that's mostly on these requests for information, on the inspection decisions. There is the possibility to go to court. There is the possibility that the judge can see in camera at the documents and see if we had valid grounds to do our decision. And if also during the inspection we treated along the lines of the decision, we didn't went beyond the scope, we respected legal professional privilege, so there is a safeguard there. Then it comes to the statement of objection. That is when we have gathered all the evidence, we draft, can even say it's kind of like a draft decision, where we put all the arguments, all the evidence in front of the parties, and they then have the possibility, before we take the decision, to reply to it. And they have the possibility of access to file, which is very important. And so they can look at the complete file, which can be very broad, where there's only sometimes a balance between confidentiality claims and the right of defense. And so we have a classical access to file, where you really get on DVD the whole non-confidential file. We have other possibilities like data rooms, non-confidentiality rings, who are also very important, because this access to file phase can take a long while. And so we're currently working on trying to make it more efficient. Then the written defense. There is an oral hearing, which is mostly very asynchronous. So that means the parties have a lot more speaking times than the Commission. And you will have our senior hierarchy there. You will have also the cabinets there of the Commissioner. So you give the possibility to the parties again, also orally explain why we might be misguided here in this case. And we have a hearing officer where we in recent years have also bolstered the role of him, who safeguard the rights during the procedure. At every time of a procedure, parties can address this and say that here the Commission didn't go along with the procedural guarantees. They can challenge it. The hearing officer can make a decision. Some of these decisions can be, for example, on confidentiality. Partly can be going even then also to the courts. I say partly because as long as you could also challenge the issue in the final decision, then you should challenge it in the final decision. But if it goes beyond the scope, as you have it with certain investigative measures, then the courts are responsible. So we have now done all the fact-finding. We have granted the rights of defense. Then we conclude, and here it's the difference with the European system that we do the fact-finding, the investigation, and we take the decision in one procedure. And of course, it gets scrutinized. The decision is first scrutinized by our legal service. We consult other departments. We then make a proposal which gets adopted by the whole college. So also there is a possibility to get opinions from other departments within the Commission. But I can tell you from my experience, they rarely change substantially the outcome of our cases. And it is a good tradition in the Commission that DG Competition works very independently when it comes to their cases, and that other commissioners are not interfering with our casework. And also in the new working arrangement with the new Commission, it's explicitly also there mentioned, which is very important because to safeguard the independence of our casework is from political influence is extremely important also for our reputation and for our reputation not only with the stakeholders, with the business companies, but also with the court. That we here enforce the law and are more an enforcement agency. So you see here the different kinds of decisions. I think I will not go into details here because we already talked about it, but I'm happy later in a discussion to go on it. Let me just better say, what do we do after the decision is taken, is adopted? Then, of course, fines have to be paid. There's a possibility for companies to make an application for inability to pay. The money, that is a question we sometimes get. I mean, probably not from such a sophisticated audience here, but where does the money go? Because you saw it's quite fundamental. It goes in the budget, and it later on gets back to the member states after a certain key, and it depends on how much they have given before to the budget. But the most important thing on it is that, yes, we have one administrative procedure which goes from the fact-finding to the decision-making, but then we have the possibilities, or the parties have the possibilities to appeal to the court. We have a two-tier court system. which is very effective, which gets more efficient over the time. We heard that the backlog gets more reduced. We get also more clarity on certain issues. We have, and there I say proudly, we have a good score so far that most cases we win, also on the fine level. But we get over 100 judgments a year in antitrust, and here the number might be, you think, yeah, why 100 judgments and you have only, I don't know, 10, 12 cases who gets decided? That's again because you have one case with 24 addressees, they all appeal, that means 24 judgments in the end, although they are, of course, on substance relatively similar and only a difference maybe on liability grounds. Then there is the possibilities, and we heard a little bit before, that we give our opinions when there are a preliminary ruling case. We get asked by national courts, they have the possibility under Article 15 to ask us questions in national antitrust cases. And I think up to 2014, we had 26 of these opinions which we issued to the national courts. So there is a very good exchange between the Commission, the European courts, but also with the national courts. And the case law is still constantly evolving. I think here Judge Peck was a little bit too modest. I think it's still, there are certain issues which are unclear and where we then get guidance more on the court, and I'm looking forward to a number of cases in the pipeline where we're looking forwards for the guidance from the court. Hopefully it goes our way. And you see, but now I talked in theory, just look quickly on a practical case. It might be interesting, it's the power cable cartel. I think the Nexam decision we heard is inspection decision is from this power cable cartel. And there you can a little bit see how it goes. You see also, of course, sometimes the difficulties that we have here massive cases. They're very big. Here you had 26 addressees. We had a statement of objection with 193 pages. That is actually very short. I've seen a lot longer statements of objection. But then what do you get? You get a lot longer reply from the parties. There, I mean, we wish we would have a thing like the court and could force them to reduce and say, well, you know, 100 pages are enough or 50 pages. But I've seen replies in other cases which were 1,000 pages plus annexes from just one party. So there's a lot to deal with. The access to file, as you see, it can take up to a year in these very, very big cases. We have this 6 days of hearings, where you see a little bit sometimes the asynchronous nature which we are facing. You have 5 persons in the case team against 135 representatives of the parties from 18 different law firms. So it's quite a challenge. And I think that is also why it is so important that you have an efficient procedure. Because otherwise, if you think about, you have to make a case against 18 different law firms, and you have a very complicated procedure with different bodies responsible for it, it's nearly impossible to make such a case in the time. So this is why, I mean, we're constantly trying to improve our procedure, but it's very important that we have uniform rules for us. So then you see a letter of facts. It's a little bit when we have new information, new evidence. Then you see the final decisions, again, 287 pages. that is actually very, very short. Then the appeals who are still ongoing, which of course also take a lot of work for the case teams and later on in our legal service. But you see all these hurdles, but it is possible to do it in the time, but only if you have efficient procedures who are uniform, if you have good standards. So, just one thing which I mentioned in the beginning, for us it's of course important because it takes so much work to focus on high impact cases. We have the possibility in antitrust to set priorities and to decide this is a non-priority case or this is maybe a case which is better dealt by the national competition authorities because they have more knowledge on the ground than we have, and we look more for cross-border things. We can see, and you can see it on the slides in the statistic before, we focused on digital very much because it's very important for cross-border trade, on liberalizing formally regulated sectors, energy security, and trying to focus really on cases where there are also maybe novel issues or the industry is so novel that it's hard to see that, you know, it's a traditional antitrust issue, but it's in a new form. And my last slide is a little bit, so let's be critical, what's the perception? I think generally we have a very good standing in the public and in the courts, but we face often also critics from the community. One classic which you have if you have this one administrative procedure is that we would have an enforcement bias, we violate fundamental rights, we are investigator, prosecutor, and judge and jury. You see with judge and jury that this comes very much from the Anglo-American colleagues. But what do we say to that? I think the Menarini judgment we already heard, we are full in compliance with fundamental rights. You see how many levels of procedural guarantees we have. And we have internally even more. We have most big cases are scrutinized by an internal panel on a fresh pair of eyes. We have a separate chief economist unit who can issue then their opinions to the commissioner independently. We have a more independent legal service which is not embedded into the case teams. So we have a lot of procedural safeguards, and we have the courts. And that is also, I mean, it is not that we are investigator, prosecutor, judge. No, we do our administrative decision with a fine, which you have in a lot of other member states too, you have it in a lot of other sectors too, and then it goes to the judge. So, which is very important in a two-tier system. So I think there these criticisms are a little bit unfair, and sometimes it's when it comes to the Anglo-American colleagues, they actually like our system. If you talk internally, they say it's great, but of course for them also a uniform system would be nicer because they deal in the US with a little bit different system. But they have high respect to ours. Then you see fines are too high, they're too low, we do too many cases against the US, we do too many cases against the EU. You see that it's always from which viewpoint that this criticism is a little bit conflicting. And I think it's important, and that's very important, that we have this independence and this transparency of the proceedings where we can show them, no, it's not that we have here, we have a political will, now we go after all the US companies. I mean, here, often high-tech is just that they are the dominant players in these markets. It's how it is. If you look on energy, it's the EU companies, because we talk about big energy companies. So it's not that we try to have any bias where you come from. And the same with the fines. I mean, they need to be deterrent. And if you see statistic how much cartel members can earn when they do a cartel, which is more than 10% of fines, then you of course want to make it as unattractive as possible. And you can even argue we are maybe too low, if you see at least the economic evidence on these cartel cases. So all in all, I think we have a good reputation and we're very happy with the system. Yes, it can be still improved, and we try to work on it together with the NCAs, with the community. But it really guarantees us this independence, and it guarantees that we save our reputation with the stakeholder, with the court, and that I think is very, very important. And with that, I want to say thank you that you listened so long to me, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.